The cracking of a pistol shot echoed through the valley, sending birds scattering into the clear blue Colorado sky as Madeline Vaughan cursed her rotten luck. It wasn't the bandits she'd feared when setting out from Denver to Victor that had finally caught up with her. It was something far worse. Her prized mare Penny had gone lame in the middle of nowhere, 20 miles from the nearest town, with the sun climbing high in the August sky of 1889. "Easy, girl," Madeline whispered, stroking the chestnut mare's neck while examining the swollen leg. The horse nickered in pain as Madeline gently prodded the fetlock. It wasn't broken, but Penny wouldn't carry her another mile, let alone to Victor where her brother waited. "Just perfect," she muttered, pushing back her hat to wipe sweat from her brow. The mountains loomed ahead, beautiful and indifferent to her predicament. Madeline was 23, educated back east but Colorado-born with a spirit that matched the territory's wildness. She'd made this journey before, but never alone and certainly never expected to find herself stranded with dwindling water and hours of daylight slipping away. She glanced anxiously at the horizon, where dark clouds hinted at an approaching summer storm. The second pistol shot came closer, making Madeline reach for the small revolver tucked in her saddlebag. She'd been taught to shoot by her father before he died, but had never pointed a gun at another human being. Now, hand trembling slightly, she prepared to defend herself if necessary. "Hello, the trail," a deep voice called from beyond the bend. "Anyone there?" Madeline hesitated, her finger hovering near the trigger. "I'm armed," she called back, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. The man who appeared around the bend sat tall on a magnificent black stallion. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but Madeline could make out a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble. His duster was dusty from the trail, and a rifle rested across his saddle, though his hands remained visible and away from any weapons. "Don't mean no harm, miss," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Was just warning off a mountain lion, saw its tracks following yours for the last mile." His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, assessed her situation in one quick glance. Horse trouble. Madeline didn't lower her gun immediately. "She's gone lame, fetlock's swollen bad." The stranger nodded, dismounting with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He moved slowly, hands still visible. "Name's Rylan Kincaid. I run cattle about 15 miles north of here." He gestured toward her gun. "Might be more comfortable for both of us if you weren't aiming that at my chest while we talk." After a moment's consideration, Madeline lowered the revolver but kept it in hand. "Madeline Vaughan. I'm heading to Victor to meet my brother." "Pleasure, Miss Vaughan." He tipped his hat, then looked at her horse with a practiced eye. "Mind if I take a look?" She stepped aside, watching carefully as he knelt beside Penny, his movements gentle and confident as he examined the swollen joint. Madeline noted the calluses on his hands, the way the horse calmed under his touch. "No riding this one for at least a week," he concluded, straightening up. "And you're a fair piece from Victor still." "I'm aware," Madeline replied dryly. "I was considering my options when you arrived." Rylan scratched his jaw thoughtfully. "There's a storm brewing, coming in from the west. You'll not want to be caught out here when it hits." He looked at her, then at his own horse, then back at the troubled sky. Without further deliberation, he began unfastening his saddlebags. "What are you doing?" Madeline asked. "Getting my gear," he answered simply, transferring his belongings to Penny's saddle. "You'll take my horse, Thunder. He's sure-footed and will get you to Victor before the storm hits." Madeline stared at him in disbelief. "And what will you do?" "Walk beside you," he said, as if it were the most natural solution in the world. "Guide you to town." "That's ridiculous. Victor is at least 20 miles from here. 19, by my reckoning." He finished securing his belongings. "And I've walked further for less worthy causes, Miss Vaughan." "We're strangers, Mr. Kincaid. Why would you do this?" His eyes met hers, direct and unguarded. "Because it's what needs doing. Can't leave a lady stranded in these parts with a storm coming. It's not safe." After a pause, he added, "And my mother would haunt me from the grave if she knew I'd done otherwise." Despite her predicament, Madeline found herself smiling. "She raised you well, then." "That she did." He checked Penny's leg once more. "She needs rest, water, and cooling." There's a stream about half a mile ahead. We'll lead her there, get her settled, and then press on to Victor. What about Penny? I can't just leave her, Rylan nodded. There's a small line cabin nearby. We'll get her there, sheltered from the storm. I can send someone back for her once you're safe in town. Madeline studied him. Everything about this man, from his worn boots to his steady gaze, spoke of honest work and straightforward intentions. Still, she'd heard enough cautionary tales to remain wary. Why were you out here shooting at mountain lions, Mr. Kincaid? Wasn't hunting them special. Been tracking a stray heifer for 2 days. He gestured to the hills. Found what was left of her about 3 miles back. Then noticed the cat's tracks following yours and thought I'd better scare it off. The casual mention of the predator sent a chill down Madeline's spine. She'd been completely unaware of the danger. So, Rylan continued, do we have an agreement, Miss Vaughan? I'd prefer to reach that cabin before the rain starts. Madeline weighed her options. Stay here with a lame horse as darkness and storms approached, or accept help from this stranger who'd already potentially saved her from a mountain lion. We have an agreement, Mr. Kincaid. But I insist on paying you for your trouble once we reach Victor. A smile crept across his face, transforming his weather-beaten features. No payment necessary. Good company on the trail is payment enough. He offered his hand to help her onto Thunder. As Madeline settled into Rylan's saddle, adjusting to the unfamiliar feel of his horse, she watched him take Penny's reins and begin leading both horses toward the stream. The storm clouds were moving faster now, and the wind carried the distinct scent of rain. You'll find Thunder responds better to leg pressure than rain, Rylan advised. He's smart enough to follow a trail, but he has opinions about how to do it. Much like his owner, I suspect, Madeline remarked before she could stop herself. Rylan's laugh was unexpected and warm. Miss Vaughan, I believe this might be an interesting journey after all. The line cabin was little more than a one-room shelter with a small corral, but to Madeline it looked like salvation as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Rylan worked quickly, settling Penny in the corral with water and what little feed was stored in the cabin. He fashioned a poultice for her leg from herbs in his saddlebag, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. You've done this before, Madeline observed, standing under the cabin's small overhang as the rain intensified. More times than I can count, he confirmed. Started working cattle when I was 12. You learn to care for horses or you don't last long. Thunder was restless, sensing the storm's energy. Rylan checked his saddle, tightening the cinch. We should move on. Storm's going to get worse before it gets better. You can't be serious, Madeline protested. We should wait it out here. Rylan shook his head. Cabin's not secure enough for a real mountain storm, and your brother will be worried. Besides, he gestured to the darkening sky, this is just the beginning. Tomorrow will be worse. Reluctantly, Madeline mounted Thunder again. Rylan secured his slicker around his shoulders and took hold of the bridle. Keep your head down and follow my lead. Trail gets tricky from here. The rain came in earnest as they left the cabin behind. Madeline hunched in the saddle, water streaming from the brim of her hat, despite Rylan's loan of an oilskin poncho. He walked steadily beside the horse, one hand on the bridle, occasionally steadying her when Thunder navigated particularly slippery sections of trail. Almost to the pass, Rylan called over the storm's noise after what seemed like hours. It's sheltered on the other side. Madeline could barely see through the curtain of rain, but she trusted Thunder's sure-footedness and Rylan's guidance. The trail narrowed, hugging a mountainside, and Rylan moved ahead, leading Thunder carefully around a blind curve. The sound came without warning, a low rumble that quickly grew to a roar. Madeline saw Rylan's head snap up just as the first rocks came tumbling down the mountainside. Slide. He shouted, lunging forward to grab Thunder's bridle. With surprising strength, he pulled horse and rider forward, past the worst of the falling debris. A rock the size of a bread box crashed onto the trail where they'd stood seconds before. They pressed against the mountain wall as more rocks clattered down, some bouncing dangerously close to their position. Rylan stood protectively beside Thunder, one arm raised to shield Madeline from flying debris. When the rumbling finally stopped, the trail behind them was completely blocked. "Are you hurt?" Rylan asked, his voice tense. "No," Madeline managed, her heart pounding. "You," he brushed dust from his shoulders, "still in one piece." He surveyed the blockage with a grim expression. "No going back that way, we'll have to push forward to Victor. The alternative being a 40-mile detour north." He squinted through the rain. "Lights fading. We need to make better time." Without further discussion, he led them forward, the pace quickening wherever the trail allowed. Madeline found herself admiring his endurance as he maintained a steady stride hour after hour, never complaining despite being soaked to the skin. As dusk approached, the rain finally began to ease. Through breaks in the clouds, Madeline caught glimpses of a valley below and distant lights that must be Victor. They had reached the pass and would now begin their descent. "We should be in town within 2 hours, Rylan said, pausing to catch his breath. "How are you holding up?" Madeline was cold, wet, and saddle sore, but seeing their destination had renewed her spirits. "I'll manage. You're the one who's been walking all day." "Been walking all my life, Miss Vaughan. Today's just a bit wetter than usual." His attempt at humor was undermined by the visible fatigue in his face. "Mr. Kincaid," Madeline said firmly, "I insist you ride for a while. I'm perfectly capable of walking." He shook his head. "Wouldn't be proper." "Propriety is a luxury we left behind with the rockslide," she countered. "You're exhausted, and if you collapse from fatigue, we'll both be stranded." A flash of admiration crossed his face. "You're not like most Eastern ladies I've met." "I was born in Denver," she corrected him. "Schooled in Boston, but Colorado's in my blood." She dismounted before he could argue further. "Now get on this horse before I consider leaving you behind." To her surprise, Rylan laughed. "Yes, madam." He mounted Thunder with considerably less grace than usual, his muscles clearly stiff from the long walk. They continued their journey with Madeline leading the horse, the trail widening enough for her to walk alongside. As they descended toward Victor, the rain stopped completely and stars began appearing in the clearing sky. "Your brother," Rylan said after a comfortable silence. "Is he meeting you in Victor for pleasure or business?" "Both, in a way. He's established himself as an assayer there. The gold mines are bringing prosperity to the region." She glanced up at him. "I'm to help him set up a proper home and perhaps teach at the school they're building." "A teacher then?" "Among other things, I studied mathematics and natural sciences." Rylan whistled low. "Impressive. Victor could use more education, plenty of money flowing through those hills, but not enough knowledge to manage it properly. And you, Mr. Kincaid. Is cattle your life's ambition?" He was quiet for a moment. "It's what I know. My father worked cattle in Texas, brought us north when I was 15, built something from nothing." He looked toward the horizon. "When he died 5 years back, the ranch came to me. 2,800 acres, 400 head of cattle, and more responsibility than I ever wanted." "You don't enjoy ranching." "Didn't say that." His voice softened. "There's freedom in it. Dawn rides, open country, honest work, but it's solitary, especially these last few years." The vulnerability in his admission touched Madeline. "It must be difficult, some days." He straightened in the saddle. "But not as difficult as what you're facing. Starting fresh in a mining town isn't easy, especially for a woman of education." "I've overcome bigger challenges," she said with more confidence than she felt. Rylan nodded. "I believe you have, Miss Vaughan." By the time they reached the outskirts of Victor, full dark had settled over the valley. The mining town glowed with lamplight, surprisingly busy despite the late hour. Madeline had visited once before, but in daylight. At night, with its saloons and gambling halls in full swing, it had a different energy, wilder and less restrained. "Your brother's place?" Rylan asked, dismounting as they approached the main street. "On Pine Street, near the new church." Madeline suddenly felt awkward. This man had saved her from certain danger, possibly even death, and now they would simply part ways. "Mr. Kincaid, I don't know how to thank you properly." "No thanks needed." He took Thunder's reins. "I'll see you safely to your brother's door." They walked side by side through Victor's muddy streets, drawing curious glances from townsfolk. Madeline was acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance, her once neat traveling dress now sodden and mud-spattered, her hair having long escaped its pins. Rylan looked equally trail-worn, but carried himself with the natural dignity of a man unconcerned with appearances. Pine Street was quieter, lined with newer homes built with mining wealth. Madeline recognized her brother's house from his descriptions, a modest two-story with a small front garden. Lights glowed in the windows and smoke curled from the chimney. "This is it," she said, stopping at the gate. "My brother Matthew's home." Before she could knock, the door flew open, and a tall man with Madeline's same dark hair rushed out. "Maddie, thank God." Matthew Vaughan embraced his sister tightly, then held her at arm's length. "I've been worried sick. You were due hours ago." "I ran into some trouble," Madeline explained, gesturing to Rylan. "This is Mr. Kincaid. He saved me when Penny went lame." Matthew turned to Rylan, taking in his exhausted, mud-covered appearance. "Sir, I am deeply in your debt." He extended his hand. Matthew Vaughan, Rylan Kincaid. They shook hands briefly. "No debt necessary, just did what anyone would." "Hardly anyone," Matthew countered. "Please, come inside." "You must be exhausted and hungry. I insist you stay for dinner at the very least." Rylan hesitated. "Appreciate the offer, but I should find lodging for the night and see to my horse." "Nonsense," Matthew insisted. "I have a small stable behind the house." "Your horse will be comfortable there, and I have a spare room. It's the least I can do." Madeline found herself hoping Rylan would accept. "Please, Mr. Kincaid, after today's ordeal, a proper meal and rest are essential." Something in her expression must have convinced him. "If you're certain it's no imposition." "None whatsoever," Matthew assured him. An hour later, having dried off, changed into borrowed clothes, and with Thunder settled comfortably in the stable, Rylan joined the Vaughan siblings for dinner. The housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, had prepared a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread that seemed like a feast after the day's trials. As they ate, Madeline recounted their adventure, finding herself unexpectedly animated as she described the rockslide and Rylan's quick thinking. "He literally pulled Thunder and me out of death's path," she concluded, "and then walked for hours in the pouring rain without a single complaint." "You're embarrassing me, Miss Vaughan," Rylan said quietly, though a slight flush colored his cheeks. Matthew raised his glass. "To Mr. Kincaid, then, a true gentleman of the West." "And to your sister," Rylan responded, lifting his own glass, "who showed remarkable courage through it all." Madeline felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. There was something about the way Rylan looked at her with genuine respect, and perhaps something more that made her pulse quicken. "Tell me, Mr. Kincaid," Matthew said, refilling their glasses, "what brings you to these parts? Victor's a fair distance from decent grazing land." "Business, mostly. Looking to arrange better prices for my beef with some of the mining companies." Rylan set down his fork. "And I've been considering some investments. The railroad spur they're building to Cripple Creek could change transportation in these parts." "You have a good eye for opportunity," Matthew nodded approvingly. "The mines are producing more gold each month. Victor will be a real city before long." The conversation continued pleasantly, ranging from local politics to cattle prices to Madeline's experiences in Boston. She found herself watching Rylan as he spoke, the way his hands gestured to emphasize points, the genuine interest he showed in Matthew's work, the subtle humor that occasionally surfaced in his comments. Despite his rough exterior, he was well-informed and thoughtful. When Mrs. Holloway brought in apple pie for dessert, Matthew excused himself briefly to retrieve something from his study. In his absence, a comfortable silence fell between Madeline and Rylan. "Your brother seems a good man," Rylan observed. "The best," Madeline agreed. "He's been my guardian since our parents died, insisted I complete my education before joining him here." She traced the rim of her water glass with one finger. "Mr. Kincaid, about Penny, I'm still concerned about leaving her in that cabin." "I've been thinking about that," he replied. "I have business in town for 2 days. After that, I can retrieve her and bring her here if that suits you." Relief flooded through her. "That would be wonderful. I'd be happy to pay you for." He raised a hand to stop her. We've already settled that matter, Miss Vaughan, no payment. Then at least let me accompany you, she countered. She's my responsibility after all. Rylan considered this. The trail's rough, especially after that slide, but if your brother approves and the weather holds. Approves of what? Matthew asked, returning with a bottle of brandy and 3 small glasses. Mr. Kincaid has offered to retrieve Penny after his business concludes, Madeline explained. I'd like to go with him. Matthew frowned slightly. After what you've just been through, I'm not sure that's wise, Maddie. I survived it once, she pointed out, and I hate the thought of imposing further on Mr. Kincaid's generosity. It's no imposition, Rylan assured them both. But your brother's concerns are valid. The trail's not easy, even in good weather. Matthew studied his sister's determined expression, then sighed. You always were stubborn. He poured 3 measures of brandy. Very well, but only if Mr. Kincaid agrees to stay in Victor until the weather improves. I won't have you rushing back out into danger. That's reasonable, Rylan conceded. My business might take longer than expected anyway. He accepted the brandy glass Matthew offered, to safe journeys and new friendships. They toasted, and Madeline felt the brandy's warmth spread through her chest, mingling with a different kind of warmth that had been building since her first encounter with Rylan Kincaid. Later, after Matthew had shown Rylan to the guest room and retired himself, Madeline stood by her bedroom window, looking out at the now clear night sky. The day's events replayed in her mind the fear when Penny went lame, the surprise of Rylan's appearance, the intensity of the journey to Victor. She had known many men in Boston, sophisticated, educated men who quoted poetry and discussed philosophy. Yet none had affected her the way this quiet rancher had, with his straightforward courage and unassuming kindness. It was unsettling and exhilarating all at once. Don't be foolish, she whispered to herself. You barely know him. But even as she slipped into bed, exhaustion finally claiming her, Madeline knew that tomorrow she would look forward to seeing Rylan Kincaid again. Morning in Victor brought clear skies and bustling activity as the mining town came to life. Madeline woke to the sounds of wagons on the street below and the distant whistle of the ore processing mill. For a moment, she was disoriented, the previous day's adventure seeming almost dreamlike. Then her muscles protested as she sat up, a tangible reminder of the ordeal she'd endured. After dressing in one of the few suitable outfits she'd brought in her saddlebags, Madeline made her way downstairs. Voices drifted from the kitchen, Matthew's familiar tones and the deeper, more measured cadence that she already recognized as Rylan's. Good morning, she greeted them, suddenly self-conscious as both men rose from the table. Maddie, Matthew smiled. How are you feeling? A bit sore, but otherwise fine. Her eyes met Rylan's briefly. He looked different in the morning light, freshly shaven, his dark hair still damp from washing, wearing clean clothes that Matthew must have lent him. The borrowed shirt strained slightly across his broader shoulders. Miss Vaughan, Rylan nodded respectfully. Glad to see you recovered. Thanks to you, she replied, taking the chair Mrs. Holloway pulled out for her. And please, after yesterday's adventures, I think you might call me Madeline. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Madeline, then, and I'm Rylan to my friends. Friends, she echoed, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Holloway. I suppose saving someone's life does accelerate the acquaintance process. Matthew chuckled. Indeed it does. Rylan was just telling me about his ranch north of here. Sounds like quite an operation. It keeps me busy, Rylan said modestly, though not as busy as your assayer's office seems to keep you. The mines don't rest, and neither can I, Matthew agreed. Speaking of which, I should be going. The morning samples will be waiting. He rose, kissing the top of Madeline's head. Will you be all right today? I could postpone my meetings. Don't be ridiculous, Madeline assured him. I'm perfectly fine. I thought I might explore the town a bit, get my bearings. Actually, Rylan interjected, I was hoping you might accompany me this morning. I need to arrange feed and boarding for Thunder at the livery, and then I have a meeting with the supply manager at the Independence mine. He hesitated. Your knowledge of mathematics might be helpful when reviewing their commissary contracts. Madeline raised an eyebrow. Are you offering me employment, Mr. Kincaid? Offering the benefit of your expertise, he corrected, a glint of amusement in his eyes. Unless you had other plans. No other plans, she admitted, and I'd be interested to see the mining operations up close. Matthew looked between them thoughtfully. The Independence is one of our more reputable operations. Still, Maddie. I'll be perfectly safe with Mr. Kincaid, she assured her brother, surprised by her own certainty. Rylan, he corrected gently. With Rylan, she amended, feeling a small thrill at the informality. After breakfast, they set out into the bustling streets of Victor. The mining town had grown significantly since Madeline's last visit 2 years ago. New buildings stood where there had been vacant lots, and the streets teemed with miners, merchants, and the various characters drawn to a boom town. It's changed, Madeline observed as they walked toward the livery stable. Gold has a way of transforming places, Rylan replied, not always for the better. You don't approve of mining towns, he considered his answer carefully. They burn bright but often brief. I've seen towns like this rise and fall with the ore veins. His eyes scanned the wooden structures lining the street. People stake everything on golden dreams, but few plan for when the gold runs out. You prefer the steadiness of cattle ranching, Madeline deduced. Cattle have their own risks: drought, disease, harsh winters. But there's something honest about the work. You get what you earn through effort, not luck. At the livery stable, Rylan negotiated boarding for Thunder with a grizzled old ostler who clearly knew his business. Madeline watched with interest as the two men discussed feed, shoeing, and care with the serious attention such matters deserved in this part of the world. Your mare, the ostler asked Madeline after they'd concluded their business. Mr. Kincaid says she's laid up in a line cabin. Yes, with a swollen fetlock. We had to leave her yesterday. The old man nodded sagely. Good horse is worth more than gold out here. You aiming to fetch her soon as weather permits, Rylan answered. Probably day after tomorrow. Might want to take Doc Wilson with you, the ostler suggested. He's handy with horse ailments, been treating miners' mules for years. Good advice, Rylan agreed, dropping a coin into the man's palm. Much obliged. As they left the stable, Madeline was struck by how easily Rylan navigated these interactions, respectful but confident, never talking down to working men but never allowing himself to be cheated either. It was a different kind of social grace than she'd observed in Boston, but no less skillful. Their next stop was the general store, where Rylan needed to purchase supplies for the journey back to the line cabin. The store was crowded, filled with miners stocking up before heading to their claims and townspeople doing their weekly shopping. Mr. Kincaid. The shopkeeper called from behind the counter. Heard you were in town. How's the beef business? Steady as always, Jenkins. Rylan shook the man's hand. This is Miss Vaughan, Matthew's sister. The assayer's sister. Welcome to Victor, miss. Jenkins beamed. Your brother's a fair man. We need more like him in these parts. As Rylan selected supplies, Madeline browsed the store's eclectic inventory, everything from mining equipment to ladies' hatpins, arranged with little regard for organization. She paused at a display of books, surprised to find recent publications among them. The mine managers' wives demand the latest novels, Jenkins explained, noticing her interest. Try to keep a respectable selection, though freight costs make them dear. I see you have Whitman, Madeline noted, picking up a volume of poetry. Not my taste, but it sells to the educated types, Jenkins replied. You a reading lady, Miss Vaughan. I am indeed, she smiled. Though I left most of my library in Denver. When she rejoined Rylan at the counter, she found him adding the Whitman volume to his purchases. You didn't need to, she began. Consider it trail reading, he said quietly, for when we retrieve your horse. The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her more deeply than any elaborate gift might have. Thank you. Their final stop before the mine was the telegraph office, where Rylan sent a message to his foreman about his extended stay in Victor. As they waited, Madeline noticed a wanted poster on the wall, a rough sketch of a hard-faced man with a substantial reward offered for his capture. Lucas Barrow, Rylan said, following her gaze. Robbed the stage to Cripple Creek twice this month. Is that common around here? More than it should be. Gold shipments are tempting targets. He frowned at the poster. Barrow's dangerous, killed a guard on his last job. A shadow crossed Madeline's mind. We were fortunate not to encounter any such characters yesterday. Very fortunate, Rylan agreed soberly, though I suspect even Barrow would have thought twice about being out in that storm. The Independence mine lay a mile outside town, its head frame and processing buildings sprawling across the mountainside. As they approached, Madeline was struck by the industrial scale of the operation's steam engines powering massive equipment, ore carts running on narrow rails, and dozens of men moving purposefully between buildings. Impressive, isn't it? Rylan remarked. They're pulling $2,000 in gold from the ground every day. And how much stays in Victor? Madeline asked, noting the stark contrast between the substantial mining infrastructure and the hastily constructed town. Sharp observation, Rylan nodded approvingly. Eastern investors take the lion's share. That's why your brother's position is so important. He ensures the miners and claim owners get fair value for their ore. They were met at the mine office by Howard Blackwell, the supply manager, a thin, precise man with ink-stained fingers and a harried expression. Kincaid, right on time, Blackwell greeted them, and you've brought Miss Vaughan, the assayer's sister, Rylan introduced her. She has a head for figures that might help us with these contracts. Blackwell looked skeptical but didn't object. Very well, come inside. The next 2 hours were spent reviewing supply agreements and beef contracts. Madeline quickly proved her value, identifying several calculation errors that would have cost Rylan considerably. Blackwell's initial skepticism gave way to grudging respect as she demonstrated a thorough understanding of the numbers. Your sister teaches mathematics. Blackwell asked Madeline during a pause in their work. No relation, she corrected, and yes, among other subjects. He tapped his pencil thoughtfully. The mine manager's been talking about starting a proper school for the employees' children. Might be worth discussing with him before you leave. By the time they concluded their business, with terms more favorable to Rylan than when they'd started, the sun was high overhead. As they walked back toward town, Madeline found herself unusually pleased with the morning's work. You were impressive in there, Rylan said as they descended the mine road. Blackwell isn't easily intimidated, but you had him backpedaling on those freight calculations. Simple arithmetic, she demurred, though I admit it felt good to put my education to practical use. Is that what brought you west again, seeking practical application for your knowledge? Madeline considered the question. Partly. Boston has many schools and qualified teachers. Here, education can make a real difference. She paused, and I miss the mountains, the openness. In Boston, I always felt contained. I understand that, Rylan nodded. Spent a season working timber in Oregon once. Beautiful country, but too many trees. Couldn't see the horizon, made me uneasy. Exactly. Madeline exclaimed, surprised by his perfect comprehension of something she'd struggled to explain to her Eastern friends. It's as if a shout from behind interrupted her. They turned to see a mine worker running toward them, waving urgently. Mr. Kincaid, the man called. Telephone message from town. You're needed at the assayer's office right away. Madeline felt a chill of apprehension. Matthew, the message didn't say, miss, just that it's urgent. They hurried back to town, the earlier lightness of their conversation forgotten. The assayer's office was on Main Street, a solid brick building that stood out among the wooden structures surrounding it. As they approached, Madeline saw a small crowd gathered outside. Make way, Rylan said firmly, clearing a path for them through the onlookers. Inside, they found Matthew at his desk, unharmed but visibly upset. A sheriff's deputy stood nearby, notebook in hand. Maddie, thank God, Matthew said when he saw them. I was worried when Mrs. Holloway said you'd gone to the mine. What's happened? Madeline asked, relief at seeing her brother safe quickly replaced by new concern. Robbery, the deputy answered. First National Bank was hit an hour ago. 3 men armed. Anyone hurt? Rylan asked. Teller took a bullet in the shoulder. Doc's with him now. The deputy consulted his notes. Witnesses say it was Barrow's gang. They made off with nearly 10,000 in gold dust and currency. Matthew ran a hand through his hair. Some of it was a payroll shipment I certified yesterday. They must have known it was there. Which means they had inside information, Rylan concluded grimly. The deputy nodded. Sheriffs forming a posse. They headed north on the Cripple Creek Road. North, Rylan's expression sharpened. That's odd. Most gangs head south toward New Mexico territory. You know something, Kincaid? The deputy asked. Just that the North Road passes near my ranch and there's not much beyond except rough country. Rylan frowned thoughtfully. Unless they're planning to double back through the high passes. Sheriff wondered the same, the deputy confirmed. He's asked for volunteers who know those trails. Madeline saw the conflict in Rylan's face before he even spoke. You're thinking of joining them? I know those mountains better than most, he said quietly. And Barrow's gang is dangerous. They need to be stopped before they hurt anyone else. Matthew stepped forward. Rylan, you've already done more than enough for our family. No one would think less of you for staying out of this. I would, Rylan replied simply. Then, turning to Madeline, I'm sorry, this will delay retrieving your horse. She understood then that his mind was made up. Penny will manage a few more days, just... She hesitated. Be careful. His eyes held hers for a long moment. I will, and I'll honor my promise as soon as I return. The deputy coughed discreetly. Posse is gathering at the livery in 20 minutes. If you're coming, I'll be there. Rylan turned to Matthew. Would you mind if I borrowed a rifle? Mine's still with my gear at the cabin. Of course. Matthew gestured to the deputy. Jim, take Mr. Kincaid to my house and give him whatever he needs from my gun cabinet. As the men prepared to leave, Madeline felt a strange mixture of admiration and fear. In just one day, Rylan Kincaid had become someone whose safety mattered to her deeply. Mr. Kincaid Rylan, she said, stopping him at the door. Thunder is still recovering from yesterday. Don't let them give you an inferior mount. A smile touched his lips. I won't, and I'll be back before you know it, Madeline. Only after he had gone did she realize she was still holding the volume of Whitman he'd purchased for her, clutched tightly against her chest like a talisman. The next 3 days passed with excruciating slowness for Madeline. She tried to occupy herself by helping Matthew organize his home, meeting local women who might become friends, and exploring the possibility of teaching positions mentioned by Blackwell. But her thoughts constantly returned to Rylan and the posse, somewhere in the mountains pursuing dangerous men. News arrived sporadically. The posse had found the robbers' abandoned horses. They discovered a campsite, still warm. They were tracking the gang through difficult terrain. Each report brought temporary relief that the pursuit continued, followed by renewed worry about the dangers involved. On the afternoon of the third day, Madeline was arranging books in Matthew's study when she heard commotion in the street. She rushed to the window to see riders coming into town, the returning posse, moving slowly, some men clearly injured. Without pausing to grab a hat or shawl, Madeline hurried outside. The town had gathered to meet the returning lawmen, making it difficult to see individual riders. She pushed through the crowd, scanning faces desperately. They got Barrow, someone near her said, shot him when he resisted. What about the others? Another voice asked, one dead, one captured, and the money recovered, most of it. Madeline barely registered these details, still searching for the one face that mattered. Then the crowd parted and she saw him, Rylan, dismounting from an unfamiliar horse, dusty and unshaven but wonderfully, blessedly alive. Their eyes met across the street, and something passed between them that made the surrounding noise and movement fade away. Without conscious thought, Madeline moved toward him. You're back, she said when she reached him, suddenly unsure what else to say. I promised I would be. His voice was hoarse from trail dust, but his eyes were warm. She noticed then the bandage on his left arm, blood seeping through the rough dressing. You're hurt, just a graze, he assured her. Barrow was a good shot. You need a doctor, she insisted, taking his right arm without thinking, after I report to the sheriff. He nodded toward the lawman dismounting nearby. It's not serious, Madeline. She didn't release his arm. Then I'll wait and we'll see the doctor together. If her boldness surprised him, he didn't show it. Instead, a tired smile crossed his face. "I'd welcome the company." The sheriff's debriefing was mercifully brief. Barrow had been killed resisting capture, one of his men wounded and taken prisoner, the third dead in the initial exchange of gunfire. Most of the stolen money had been recovered, hidden in saddlebags the robbers had carried when they abandoned their horses. Kincaid here was the one who spotted their trail when they left the main path, the sheriff told the assembled townspeople. And he took the bullet meant for Deputy Collins when Barrow opened fire. A cheer went up from the crowd, embarrassing Rylan visibly. He disentangled himself from the gathering as soon as possible, accepting Madeline's guidance toward the doctor's office. "You didn't mention you were shot saving someone," she said as they walked. "Wasn't trying to save anyone in particular," he shrugged. "Just saw Barrow aiming and reacted." Dr. Wilson's office was crowded with posse members seeking treatment for various injuries. When the doctor saw Rylan's bloodied bandage, however, he gestured them into a treatment room immediately. "Heard you were instrumental in catching those robbers," the doctor said, unwrapping the crude bandage. "Town owes you a debt, Mr. Kincaid." "Just did what needed doing," Rylan replied, wincing slightly as the doctor examined the wound. "Clean through the meat of the arm," Dr. Wilson observed. "No bone damage. You're lucky, son." Madeline watched as the doctor cleansed and properly dressed the wound, noting Rylan's stoic acceptance of what must have been considerable pain. When the doctor stepped out to retrieve medicines, she moved closer. "Does it hurt terribly?" she asked softly. "Had worse from ornery steers," he answered, though the tightness around his eyes belied his casual tone. "I'm more concerned about delaying our trip to retrieve your horse." "Penny can wait another day or two," Madeline assured him. "You need rest." "What I need," Rylan said with unexpected determination, "is a bath, a meal, and then to honor my promise to you." "You can't possibly think of traveling tomorrow," she protested. "Not with that injury." "The day after, then, if the doctor agrees." His expression softened. "I gave my word, Madeline. That matters to me." She realized then that this wasn't merely stubbornness, but something deeper, a code he lived by that defined his character. "The day after tomorrow," she conceded, "if Dr. Wilson approves and the weather holds." That evening, after Rylan had rested, bathed, and eaten a substantial meal prepared by Mrs. Holloway, the three of them sat in Matthew's parlor. The banker had personally delivered the reward money for Barrow's capture, $500 split among the posse members, with extra for Rylan given his role in tracking the robbers. "A tidy sum," Matthew remarked as Rylan tucked the money into his vest pocket. "What will you do with it?" "New breeding stock, probably," Rylan replied. "Been wanting to improve the herd." "Always thinking of the ranch," Madeline observed. "Don't you ever spend money on yourself?" Rylan seemed genuinely perplexed by the question. "The ranch is myself, in a way. Everything I put into it comes back eventually." "Speaking of the ranch," Matthew said, "I've been meaning to ask about your cattle operation. With the mines expanding, the demand for beef will only increase. Might be opportunity there." The conversation turned to business, with Matthew expressing interest in potentially investing in Rylan's ranch. As the men discussed figures and projections, Madeline found herself watching Rylan, the animation that came into his face when he spoke about his land, the quiet confidence with which he outlined his plans for expansion. She had known many ambitious men, but Rylan's ambition was different, not for wealth or status, but for building something enduring, something that aligned with his values. It was, she realized, incredibly attractive. When Matthew excused himself to fetch cigars, a comfortable silence fell between them. Rylan's gaze drifted to the Whitman volume on the side table. "Have you had a chance to read it?" he asked. "A little," Madeline admitted. "It's quite progressive." A smile tugged at his lips. "Too progressive for a Boston-educated lady?" "Not at all," she replied, matching his teasing tone, "though perhaps unexpected from a cattle rancher." "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father," Rylan explained, his expression softening with memory. She brought her books west with us, read to us every evening, said poetry was as necessary as bread. She sounds wonderful, Madeline said gently. She was. He looked directly at her then. She would have liked you, I think, your independence, your mind. The simple statement affected Madeline more deeply than any elaborate compliment might have. Before she could respond, Matthew returned, and the moment passed, but the warmth it kindled remained. 2 days later, with Dr. Wilson's reluctant approval, they set out to retrieve Penny from the line cabin. The weather was perfect, clear skies, mild temperatures, the mountains vivid against the horizon. Rylan rode a horse borrowed from Matthew, his injured arm now properly bandaged and supported by a sling. Madeline rode beside him on a gentle mare from the livery stable. "Your arm is paining you," she observed as they left the town behind. "It's manageable," he replied, adjusting his position in the saddle. "More annoying than painful." "You're a terrible liar, Mr. Kincaid." That earned her a genuine laugh. "My mother said the same thing, could never get away with anything as a boy." The journey that had been so harrowing in the storm was pleasant now, the trail dry and easily navigable, the landscape breathtaking in the clear light. They rode at an easy pace, talking comfortably about everything and nothing: Madeline's studies in Boston, Ryland's experiences driving cattle, books they had read, places they had seen. By midday, they had reached the pass where the rockslide had occurred. The trail had been partially cleared, enough for single-file travel. "Careful here," Rylan cautioned as they navigated the narrowed path. Still unstable, they made it safely across, continuing their descent toward the valley where the line cabin stood. As they rode, Madeline found herself wishing the journey would last longer. There was something about being alone with Rylan in this vast landscape that felt right in a way she couldn't quite articulate. "There it is," Rylan said eventually, pointing to the small structure nestled among trees beside a stream. "Your horse should be—" He stopped abruptly, his posture tensing. "Something's wrong." Madeline followed his gaze. The cabin door stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. The small corral beside it was empty. "Penny," she whispered, fear clutching at her heart. "Stay here," Rylan instructed, dismounting smoothly despite his injured arm. He loosened his pistol in its holster and approached the cabin cautiously. Madeline ignored his directive, sliding from her saddle and following at a slight distance. Her eyes scanned the area for any sign of her horse. Rylan reached the cabin first, peering inside before entering. Moments later he emerged, his expression grim. "Someone's been here recently?" "Penny." "No sign of her." He moved to the corral, examining the ground. "Tracks here, more than one horse, 3, maybe 4. Rustlers?" Madeline asked, her stomach sinking. "Possibly." Rylan continued his examination, walking in a widening circle around the cabin. "Or." He stopped, kneeling to study something in the dirt. "What is it?" "Boot print, city-made, not ranch wear." He looked up, his expression suddenly alert. "And this?" He held up a small brass shell casing. "What does it mean?" Rylan stood slowly. "It means we might have stumbled onto Barrow's remaining gang member." He scanned the surrounding hills. "The third man who escaped during the shootout." Fear rippled through Madeline, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What do? "We follow the tracks," Rylan said decisively. "But carefully, if it is Barrow's man, he's desperate and dangerous." "I'm coming with you," Madeline stated before he could suggest otherwise. Rylan studied her face. "It could be dangerous." "So was being stranded with a lame horse," she countered. "Yet here we are." After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "Stay close and do exactly as I say." He checked his pistol, then adjusted his sling to give himself more mobility. The tracks lead north into rougher country. They mounted and set off, following the trail of hoofprints that led away from the cabin. Rylan rode slightly ahead, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain around them. Madeline found herself watching for any movement, any sign of threat or, more hopefully, of Penny. The trail climbed steadily, moving into more rugged terrain where pines gave way to scrubby vegetation and exposed rock. After an hour's ride, Rylan raised his hand, signaling a halt. "What is it?" Madeline whispered. "Smoke." He pointed to a thin gray line rising from behind a ridge ahead. Someone's made camp, they dismounted, securing their horses in a stand of trees. Rylan removed his sling entirely, flexing his injured arm with a slight grimace. "You'll stay here," he said, his tone brooking no argument this time. "I'll scout ahead and see what we're dealing with. And if you don't return, wait 1 hour, then ride straight back to Victor." He checked his pistol once more. "Tell the sheriff exactly where we were and what we found." Madeline wanted to protest but knew this was not the time. Instead, she reached out and briefly touched his good arm. "Be careful." He covered her hand with his own for just a moment. "I will." Then he was gone, moving silently through the brush toward the ridge. Madeline settled against a tree trunk, watching the spot where he disappeared, her heart beating uncomfortably fast. The minutes stretched endlessly. She strained to hear any sound, a gunshot, a shout, anything that might indicate trouble. But there was only the whisper of wind through the trees and the occasional call of a bird. Just as she was beginning to fear the worst, a movement caught her eye. Rylan, returning along the same path he'd taken. His expression was unreadable as he approached. "It's him," he said without preamble. "Barrow's man has a camp set up in a small box canyon. Penny's there along with 2 other horses. Is she all right? Seems to be. He's using the cabin's corral supplies to keep them penned." Rylan sat beside her, lowering his voice. "He's alone but armed, rifle and pistol that I could see." "What's the plan?" "Wait until dark," Rylan decided. "He'll be less alert then. I can approach from the canyon wall, take him by surprise." Madeline nodded slowly. "And I'll create a diversion." "No," Rylan's response was immediate. "You'll stay here safe." "A diversion would improve your chances," she argued. "I could approach from the trail, make him think I'm a lost traveler. When his attention is on me, you can get closer." "Absolutely not. This man is a killer, Madeline." "Which is precisely why you need every advantage," she countered. "I'm not suggesting I confront him directly, just draw his attention briefly." Rylan studied her with a mixture of frustration and reluctant admiration. "You're determined to put yourself in danger, aren't you?" "I'm determined to help recover my horse and ensure you don't get shot again," she corrected. "And I'm more capable than you might think." After a long moment, Rylan sighed. "We'll work out a plan, but you'll stay at a safe distance, and at the first sign of trouble, you retreat. Understood?" "Understood." As dusk approached, they refined their strategy. Madeline would approach on horseback from the trail leading into the canyon, appearing to be a traveler seeking shelter for the night. She would keep her distance, engaging the outlaw in conversation only long enough to draw his attention away from the canyon walls. Meanwhile, Rylan would position himself on the rim of the canyon, using the growing darkness for cover. "If anything feels wrong," Rylan emphasized as they prepared, "anything at all, you turn around and ride away. Penny isn't worth your life." "I'll be careful," she promised. "And you?" "I've done this before," he said simply. As darkness fell, they moved into position. Rylan disappeared into the rocks, climbing toward the canyon rim. Madeline waited the agreed upon 15 minutes, then mounted her borrowed mare and began a slow approach along the trail, deliberately making enough noise to announce her presence. The canyon opened before her, a small campfire illuminating the central space. She could see Penny and the other horses in a makeshift corral, and beside the fire, a man rose to his feet, rifle in hand. "Hello, the camp," Madeline called, keeping her voice steady. "I'm seeking shelter for the night." "Stay where you are," the man called back, rifle raised. "Who are you?" "Madeline Vaughan," she answered truthfully. "I'm traveling to Victor and lost my way after dark." The outlaw stepped closer, suspicion evident even in the dim light. "You're traveling alone." "My brother was supposed to meet me, but we must have missed each other." She kept her horse still, maintaining distance. "I saw your fire and hoped for directions." The man seemed to relax slightly, though he kept his rifle ready. "Victor's a fair piece from here, miss." "Not safe to travel these trails at night." "I feared as much," Madeline sighed dramatically. "Perhaps I could rest here briefly, just until the moon rises." As the outlaw considered this, Madeline searched the canyon rim, hoping to glimpse Rylan. There was no sign of him, but she trusted he was in position, watching. "I suppose you could warm yourself by the fire," the man said finally, "but keep your distance. I value my privacy." Madeline dismounted, leading her mare a few steps closer to the fire but still maintaining space between them. Now that she was closer, she could see the outlaw more clearly, a wiry man with several days' growth of beard and hard, calculating eyes. "That's a fine horse you have there," she remarked, gesturing toward Penny. "The chestnut mare," a flicker of unease crossed his face, "had her a while." "She resembles a horse I once owned," Madeline continued, moving slightly to keep the outlaw's back to the canyon rim. "Mine had a white blaze exactly like that one." "Lots of chestnuts look alike," he said dismissively, but his posture had tensed, his eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You said you're heading to Victor. What business you got there?" "My brother is the town assayer," Madeline replied, watching his reaction carefully. The change was immediate. His expression hardened and he raised his rifle. "Vaughan, you're that assayer's sister, the one traveling with Kincaid." Madeline's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb with me," he snarled, stepping closer. "Kincaid's the one who tracked us after the bank job. Where is he?" "Right here." The outlaw whirled at the sound of Rylan's voice behind him, but too late. Rylan stood at the edge of the firelight, his pistol aimed steadily. "Drop the rifle," Rylan commanded, slowly. For a tense moment, Madeline thought the outlaw would risk a shot. Then, calculating his odds, he lowered his weapon to the ground. "Kick it away," Rylan instructed. When the man had complied, he continued, "Now the pistol, same way." The outlaw reluctantly removed his revolver and sent it spinning into the darkness. "Madeline," Rylan said without taking his eyes off the prisoner, "there's rope in my saddlebag. Would you get it, please?" She moved quickly to Rylan's horse, which was tethered just beyond the firelight, and retrieved the coil of rope. Under Rylan's direction, she bound the outlaw's hands securely behind his back. "You broke your arm," the man observed, nodding toward Rylan's obvious injury. "That'll make it hard to get me back to Victor alone." "He's not alone," Madeline reminded him, tightening the final knot. The outlaw spat on the ground. "Won't matter, my partners will be looking for me." "Your partners are dead," Rylan informed him flatly. "Barrow took a bullet 3 days ago. The other one died in the initial shootout." The news visibly shook the man. "You're lying." "I was there," Rylan said. So was the sheriff and 12 other men. As the reality of his situation sank in, the fight seemed to drain from the outlaw. He slumped to the ground beside the fire, defeat written in every line of his body. Madeline moved to check on Penny, relieved to find the horse unharmed and apparently well cared for despite her abduction. The other horses, presumably stolen, were also in good condition. "We'll camp here tonight," Rylan decided. "Head back to Victor at first light." He glanced at their prisoner. "What's your name?" "Ellis," the man muttered. "Sam Ellis." "Well, Ellis, you're going to have a comfortable night's sleep right where you are." Rylan checked the bindings once more. "And in the morning, you'll face a judge in Victor." With the immediate danger past, they set about securing the camp for the night. Madeline prepared coffee and heated the trail rations they'd brought, while Rylan kept watch over their prisoner. They ate in shifts, one always maintaining vigilance. As the fire burned low, Madeline found herself sitting beside Rylan a short distance from where Ellis dozed fitfully, bound hand and foot. "That was brave, what you did," Rylan said quietly, "and foolish. It worked, didn't it?" She replied, wrapping her blanket more tightly around her shoulders against the night chill. "This time." He stared into the dying flames. "When he recognized you, when he raised that rifle, I've never been so scared in my life." The admission, spoken so softly she almost didn't hear it, touched something deep within her. "I was terrified too," she confessed, "but I knew you were there." "How could you be so sure?" he asked, turning to look at her. "We'd only just met days ago." Madeline considered the question seriously. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "But from the moment you offered thunder to a stranded stranger, I sensed you were someone who could be trusted, someone who does what's right, even when it's difficult." He was quiet for so long she wondered if she'd said too much. When he finally spoke, his voice was husky with emotion. "When I found you on that trail," he said, "with your lame horse and that tiny revolver, looking both frightened and fierce, something happened, something I can't explain." He hesitated. I've spent most of my adult life alone, Madeline. Content with that aloneness, but these past few days. I know, she whispered, finding courage to place her hand over his. I feel it too. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and strong. What happens when we reach Victor? I don't know, she answered honestly. I came to help Matthew to teach, perhaps. I didn't expect. This, he echoed with a small smile. A fine word for something so indefinable. It's early days yet, Madeline said softly, but I think perhaps we might have time to define it properly. In the faint glow of the embers, his eyes held hers, and for a breathless moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips, the gesture somehow more intimate than a kiss might have been. We should rest, he said. Long ride tomorrow. They returned to Victor the next day with Ellis securely bound to his saddle, the stolen horses in tow, and Penny following contentedly behind Madeline's borrowed mare. Their arrival caused a stir, with the sheriff and several deputies meeting them at the edge of town. Ellis, the sheriff confirmed after examining their prisoner. The last of Barrow's gang. Good work, Kincaid. Again, Miss Vaughan deserves equal credit, Rylan said firmly. She played an essential role. The sheriff looked skeptical but tipped his hat to Madeline nonetheless. Then the town's gratitude extends to you as well, madam. As Ellis was led away to the jail, Matthew pushed through the gathering crowd to embrace his sister. When you didn't return yesterday, I was worried sick, he scolded. And now I find you've been capturing outlaws. It wasn't quite like that, Madeline demurred. We were just retrieving Penny. And stumbled upon a wanted bank robber by coincidence, Matthew said dryly. He turned to Rylan. You seem to have a habit of involving my sister in dangerous adventures, Mr. Kincaid. Not by design, I assure you, Rylan replied seriously, though she handles herself remarkably well in such situations. Matthew's stern expression softened. That she does, always has since we were children. He glanced between them, noting something in their expressions. I suggest you both come home and rest. Mrs. Holloway has prepared a veritable feast in anticipation of your return. That evening, after baths and proper meals had restored them, Matthew raised an unexpected topic over brandy in the parlor. I've been considering your cattle operation, Rylan, he said, and I have a proposition. The bank holds deed to a parcel adjoining your property 500 acres with good water rights. Previous owner defaulted on his loans last year. Rylan leaned forward with interest. The old Ferguson place. The very same. The bank's been looking for a buyer, but it's too far from town for most miners' taste. Matthew swirled his brandy thoughtfully. I could arrange favorable terms if you're interested. I'd be very interested, Rylan acknowledged. That water alone would improve my grazing capacity significantly. Madeline watched the exchange with growing awareness. Matthew was offering more than a business opportunity. He was creating a reason for Rylan to remain connected to Victor and to them. There would be one condition, Matthew continued, confirming her suspicion. The bank prefers local investment. It would strengthen your position if you maintained a residence in Victor, perhaps a small house in town for when business brings you here. Rylan's eyes flickered briefly to Madeline before returning to Matthew. I see, that's not unreasonable. I thought you might agree. Matthew smiled knowingly. We could review the particulars tomorrow if you like. Tomorrow would be fine, Rylan agreed. Later, when Matthew had retired for the night, Madeline joined Rylan on the small porch behind the house. The night was clear, stars brilliant above the silhouette of mountains. My brother isn't particularly subtle, Madeline observed, settling into a chair beside him. Rylan chuckled softly. About as subtle as a branding iron. Does that bother you? Not at all. He turned to face her. In fact, I'm grateful. He's given me a perfect excuse. Excuse for what? For seeing where this might lead, Rylan said quietly, between us. Madeline felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the evening air. And where do you think it might lead, Mr. Kincaid? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I don't know exactly, but I know I'm not ready to say goodbye to you, Madeline Vaughan. Not by a long shot. Then don't, she said simply. In the silver light of the rising moon, Rylan finally did what they'd both been thinking about since the night in the canyon. He leaned forward and kissed her gently at first, then with growing intensity as she responded. When they finally parted, breathless and a little stunned by the power of what they'd shared, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that her life had changed irrevocably. "Stay in Victor," she whispered. "Not just for the land or my brother's banking terms. I will," he promised. "For as long as you'll have me." The transformation of their relationship was not instantaneous. Over the following weeks, as summer gave way to early autumn, they built something carefully, deliberately. Rylan purchased a small house on Pine Street, just 3 doors down from Matthew's home. He divided his time between his ranch and Victor, establishing a rhythm that allowed his business to thrive while their connection deepened. For Madeline, the period was equally productive. Blackwell had indeed spoken to the mine manager, resulting in an offer to establish Victor's first proper school. With Matthew's backing and Rylan's encouragement, she accepted the position, finding unexpected fulfillment in teaching the miners' children bright, resilient youngsters eager for knowledge and opportunity. Their courtship progressed with a natural momentum that felt neither rushed nor hesitant. They rode together on Sundays, Madeline on Penny, now fully recovered, and Rylan on Thunder. He taught her to shoot properly, beyond the basic instruction her father had provided. She introduced him to Shakespeare, reading aloud by lamplight on quiet evenings. When Rylan formally asked Matthew for permission to court Madeline, a traditional gesture, she found surprisingly touching. Her brother pretended to consider the request seriously, before breaking into a broad smile. "I was wondering when you'd get around to asking," Matthew said, clapping Rylan on the shoulder. "You've had my blessing since you walked beside her horse that first day." October brought the first snow to the high country, dusting the mountains with white. It also brought a letter that would test their still evolving relationship. Madeline found Rylan on his porch, reading the correspondence with a troubled expression. "Bad news?" she asked, joining him on the porch swing. "Not bad exactly." He handed her the letter. "An offer from a cattle broker in Denver. Wants my entire fall herd at premium prices, delivered next month." Madeline scanned the document. "This is wonderful, isn't it? The price is certainly favorable." "It is," Rylan agreed. "But it would mean leaving Victor for at least a month, possibly longer. The drive to Denver will take 2 weeks each way, and there will be business to settle there," understanding dawned. "And you're concerned about being away?" "I am." He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "We've just found each other, Madeline. A month feels like an eternity." She felt the same reluctance at the thought of their separation, but also recognized the opportunity this represented for him. "You must take it. This could secure your expansion plans for next year." "I know," he sighed. "And my men can handle the drive, but for the negotiations in Denver, that needs to be me." An idea formed in Madeline's mind, bold but not impossible. "What if I came with you?" "Not on the cattle drive," she added quickly, seeing his expression. "But to Denver. The school term ends in 3 weeks. I could travel by stage and meet you there." Rylan stared at her in amazement. "You do that, of course." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, I have friends in Denver I'd like to see, and I've never seen your business side in action, the shrewd cattle baron negotiating deals." A slow smile spread across his face. "Cattle baron, I think you overestimate my standing." "Perhaps," she teased. "Or perhaps I see what you're becoming more clearly than you do." They made plans accordingly. Rylan would leave with his trail crew in 1 week, driving 300 head of prime beef cattle to Denver. Madeline would follow by stagecoach when the school term ended, staying with friends until he arrived. They would have at least a week together in Denver before returning to Victor. The week before his departure passed too quickly. On their last evening together, Rylan took her to dinner at Victor's finest restaurant. Such as it was a far cry from Denver's establishments, but making up in enthusiasm what it lacked in refinement. "I have something for you," Rylan said as they walked home under a canopy of stars. He reached into his pocket and produced a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Madeline unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside was a tiny photograph of the two of them, taken by a traveling photographer who had set up his equipment in Victor's town square the previous month. Their faces were solemn in the captured moment, as befitted the photographic process, but their eyes held unmistakable happiness. "So you won't forget what I look like," Rylan said softly, "as if I could." Madeline turned her back to him. "Help me put it on." His fingers were surprisingly deft as he fastened the chain around her neck, and she shivered slightly at the touch of his hands against her skin. When she turned back to face him, the locket resting just below her collarbone, his expression was one of profound tenderness. "I've never felt this way about anyone," he confessed. "The thought of leaving, even temporarily—" "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." He kissed her then, more deeply than ever before, and Madeline responded with equal fervor, pouring into the embrace all the emotions that words seemed inadequate to express. When they finally parted, both breathless, Rylan rested his forehead against hers. "1 month," he promised. "And then I'll never leave you again unless absolutely necessary." "I'll hold you to that, Mr. Kincaid." Their separation proved both more difficult and more enlightening than either had anticipated. For Madeline, the intensity of her longing for Rylan's presence surprised her. She had always prided herself on her independence, yet found herself watching the road from Victor for any sign of a rider bringing news from the cattle drive. For Rylan, the long days on the trail provided ample time for reflection. The drive itself went smoothly, good weather, few predators, cattle in prime condition, leaving his mind free to contemplate the remarkable turn his life had taken. By the time they reached the outskirts of Denver, he had made a decision that would alter his future irrevocably. Their reunion in Denver was joyous. Madeline, waiting at the hotel where Rylan always stayed when in the city, rushed into his arms the moment he appeared in the lobby, heedless of the dust from the trail that still clung to his clothes. "Never again," she declared after they had exchanged rather more enthusiastic greetings than was strictly proper in public. "A month is entirely too long." "Far too long," he agreed, holding her at arm's length to better see her face. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered." The week that followed was magical. While Rylan conducted his business during the days, selling his cattle at the excellent price promised and purchasing supplies for the ranch, their evenings were spent exploring Denver together. They attended the theater, dined in elegant restaurants, and walked through the city parks, relishing each other's company after the long separation. On their final night in Denver, Rylan took Madeline to dinner at the Brown Palace Hotel, the city's most prestigious establishment. He seemed unusually nervous throughout the meal, checking his pocket repeatedly and stumbling over conversation that normally flowed easily between them. "Is something wrong?" Madeline finally asked as they finished dessert. "You seem distracted." "Not wrong," he assured her. "Just important." He took a deep breath. "Madeline, these past months have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she said softly. "When I found you on that trail with your lame horse, I had no idea my life was about to change completely." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I've come to realize that my ranch, my work, everything I've built means nothing without you to share it with." With his free hand, he withdrew a small velvet box from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. "I had this made here in Denver." "It's not as fancy as what you might have had in Boston, but Rylan," Madeline interrupted gently, her heart racing. "Ask me." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a single diamond set in gold, simple but exquisitely crafted. "Madeline Vaughan, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, share my ranch and my name, and let me love you for the rest of our days?" Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, then raised her hand to his lips. Around them, other diners who had witnessed the moment broke into spontaneous applause. "When?" Madeline asked as they walked back to their hotel, her hand securely in his, the new ring catching the light of the street lamps. "As soon as you like," Rylan replied. Tomorrow, if a judge could be found, she laughed. Matthew would never forgive us, and I'd like a proper wedding, even if a small one. Christmas, then, he suggested. A winter wedding in Victor? Perfect, she agreed, leaning into his side as they walked. That gives us 2 months to prepare, and the school will be on holiday. They returned to Victor as an engaged couple, greeted with enthusiasm by Matthew and genuine goodwill from the townspeople who had come to respect them, both Rylan for his part in capturing Barrow's gang, Madeline for her dedication to the town's children. The following weeks passed in a whirl of preparations. Madeline ordered a wedding dress from Denver, simpler than Boston fashion dictated but elegant nonetheless. Rylan expanded his Victor house, adding rooms that would transform it from a bachelor's residence to a proper home for them both, at least when they weren't at the ranch. As December arrived, bringing heavy snow to the mountains, one final challenge presented itself. The pastor who was to perform their ceremony fell ill with pneumonia, too sick to officiate but expected to recover. With the wedding less than 2 weeks away, they faced the prospect of postponement. We could wait until spring, Matthew suggested when they gathered to discuss the dilemma. No, Rylan said firmly, surprising them both with his vehemence. I'm not waiting another 3 months to make Madeline my wife. The determination in his voice sent a thrill through Madeline. What about Judge Parker in Cripple Creek? She suggested. He could legally marry us even if it wouldn't be a church ceremony. That's an option, Matthew acknowledged, though the pass to Cripple Creek is treacherous this time of year. Or, Rylan said thoughtfully, we bring the judge here. He outlined a plan that was typically straightforward. He would travel to Cripple Creek with 2 experienced mountain men, bring Judge Parker back to Victor for the ceremony, then ensure his safe return afterward. It's risky, Matthew cautioned. That pass has claimed lives in winter storms. I'm aware, Rylan acknowledged, but we'll watch the weather carefully and only attempt it during a clear spell. He turned to Madeline. If you'd prefer to wait, though. I wouldn't, she said simply, but I don't want you risking your life for a wedding date. Not just a date, he corrected. A beginning, our beginning. In the end, they compromised. Rylan would attempt to bring Judge Parker from Cripple Creek, but only if the weather remained clear. If conditions deteriorated, they would postpone until the spring thaw made travel safer. Fortune favored them. A high-pressure system moved in, bringing cold but crystal-clear days perfect for mountain travel. Rylan and his companions made the journey to Cripple Creek and back without incident, returning triumphantly with Judge Parker, a jovial man who declared himself honored to officiate at the wedding of Victor's heroes, as he put it. December 24, 1889, dawned bright and cold, the mountains surrounding Victor gleaming white under a flawless blue sky. The town's small church, though without its pastor, had been decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the Christmas Eve service that would follow the wedding. Madeline stood in a small anteroom, Matthew beside her, waiting for the signal that would begin her walk down the aisle. Her dress, ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, complemented the small bouquet of hothouse roses Matthew had secretly ordered from Denver at considerable expense. Nervous? Her brother asked, straightening his tie. Not about marrying Rylan, she answered honestly. Just about doing it in front of the entire town. Matthew chuckled. That was inevitable. You two are quite the sensation in Victor. He offered his arm. Ready, at her nod, he opened the door. The small church was filled to capacity, every resident of Victor who could possibly attend apparently present. At the altar stood Judge Parker, resplendent in his judicial robes, and beside him, Rylan clean-shaven, hair neatly trimmed, wearing a new suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. As Madeline began her walk down the aisle on Matthew's arm, Rylan's eyes never left her face. The naked adoration in his expression made her heart skip a beat. This man, this strong, honorable, remarkable man, was about to become her husband. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They had written their own vows, simple declarations of love and commitment that reflected their journey from strangers on a mountain trail to partners for life. When Judge Parker finally pronounced them husband and wife, Rylan's kiss was both reverent and passionate, drawing appreciative murmurs from their assembled friends. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous, with seemingly everyone in Victor contributing something: food, music, decorations. Dancing continued well into the night, with Madeline and Rylan at the center of it all, unable to stop smiling, unwilling to be separated even momentarily. As midnight approached, they slipped away to begin their life together in the newly expanded house on Pine Street. Standing in the doorway, Rylan swept Madeline into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Kincaid," he whispered as he set her gently on her feet inside. "Home," she repeated, looking around the warm, inviting space that would be theirs. "It has a wonderful sound." Later, as they lay in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Madeline rested her head on Rylan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if Penny hadn't gone lame that day?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," he admitted, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "But then I remember something my mother used to say, that the most important turns in our lives often seem like misfortunes at first. Wise woman, your mother, she was." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "She also said that when you find something truly precious, you never let it go." His arms tightened around her. "I found you, Madeline, and I'm never letting go." Spring arrived in the Colorado mountains, bringing with it new beginnings. The school term ended, giving Madeline the summer months to divide between Victor and the ranch. Rylan's expansion of the property had been successful, the additional water rights proving even more valuable than anticipated. Together, they began planning improvements to the ranch house that would make it more comfortable for extended stays. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the porch of that ranch house watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold, Madeline shared news that would complete their journey. "I visited Dr. Wilson yesterday," she said, her voice carefully casual. "He confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now." Rylan turned to her, hope and question in his eyes. "Madeline," she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Rylan, in January." Joy transformed his face as the news registered. "A baby." He seemed unable to find words, pulling her instead into a careful embrace that conveyed everything words could not. "Are you happy?" she whispered against his shoulder. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought. Never dared hope for such completeness." They held each other as darkness fell, planning and dreaming. Their child would know both worlds, the refinement of Victor and the freedom of the ranch. They would provide both education and practical skills, culture and courage. "Boy or girl, this child will be extraordinary," Rylan predicted, his hand still resting protectively over their unborn baby. "How could they be otherwise with you as their mother?" "And you as their father," Madeline added softly. As stars appeared in the velvet sky above them, Madeline reflected on the remarkable chain of events that had led to this moment. A lame horse, a chance encounter, a generous cowboy who offered his mount and walked beside her. Such a simple act of kindness, yet it had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Rylan asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how sometimes the things that seem like our worst misfortunes lead us exactly where we need to be," she replied. "I was so angry when Penny went lame that day. I had no idea it was actually the luckiest moment of my life." Rylan smiled, drawing her closer. "Mine too, Mrs. Kincaid. Mine too." On a crisp January morning in 1891, with snow blanketing the countryside, their son was born, Robert Matthew Kincaid, named for Rylan's father and Madeline's brother. Strong and healthy from his first breath, he entered the world in the Victor house, attended by Dr. Wilson and welcomed with overwhelming love by his parents. As Madeline held their son while Rylan sat beside them, his arm protectively around them both, she knew with absolute certainty that their story, which began with a stranded traveler and a generous cowboy, had only just begun its most beautiful chapter. "Thank you," she said softly to her husband. "For what?" he asked, gently touching their son's tiny hand. "For stopping on that trail, for giving me your horse, for walking beside me." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "For everything that followed." Rylan leaned down to kiss her tenderly. "I would walk beside you forever, Madeline." "And I will." Outside, snow began to fall again, adding fresh whiteness to the winter landscape. But inside their home, warmth and love created a haven against all storms, a testament to the extraordinary journey that had brought them together, and the even more extraordinary life they would share in the years to come.